Welcome back, everybody. We are doing another episode of Indie Reads Aloud. I love talking with new authors, and Joseph Neely is joining us today, and he is a new to me author, and he's also a poet, and we don't get to hear from very many poets on our program. Poets, for whatever reason, I think they're more shy than novelists. So I'm very happy that you agreed to do the program today, Joseph. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
I think
Um,
every author starts as a poet. I know that's where I started.
yeah, yeah.
I think we all kind of start with that, oh, what am I going to do? I'm going to write, okay, I'll write poetry. Did you start as a poet or did you come to poetry through
Well, I
another venue?
did. I did begin writing some poetry when I was in junior high, and but I was more of a in my college and my young adult years. I was more of uh, I didn't write poetry so much. I have some unfinished novels. I published a book of essays, that sort of thing. But I came back to poetry because I've always enjoyed it. I mean, it's it's just the most accessible way for me to get what I want to get out there. So that's what I do.
Okay, awesome. I'm going to tell everybody a little bit about you and then we'll get into the program.
Sure.
Um, the roots of Joseph's writing career are in the great isolation of COVID-19. Oh my gosh, we all did so much writing during those years. He set out to journal through the pandemic, but soon became too discouraged to continue. He decided instead to collect his poems in one place so that they might not one day entirely be forgotten. He began to gather his poems, most of which were written more than 20 years ago, and posted them to a blog, which you can find the link in our show notes. And that's when he found himself that he was delighted to once again rediscover poetry. Common themes of his work include family, love of all types, faith and the occasional lack thereof, loss of innocence, and a love of place, specifically Lake Michigan. He lives near Ann Arbor, Michigan with his wife Linda and a dog named Lincoln. Joseph and Linda have a whole parcel of grandchildren, some of whom live nearby, and he is extremely proud of his sobriety, a challenge he accepted in 2012. Congratulations on that achievement.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate
I'm
that.
I'm very proud of you for that. I know it's a difficult road, and
Yeah, it was. I mean, for 95% of people can drink with no problem, and then there's the 5% like me that can't. And it took me a few false starts, but I got there, and it's been a wonderful development in my life. Can't tell
oh,
you how nice it feels to wake up without a hangover. I can still
oh my gosh,
appreciate that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I I I commend your courageousness in taking that path because as you say, some of us never get there.
Yeah.
So I'm
Well, I
really
had a lot of
grateful that
help
you're
from,
willing to share that story.
yeah, I had a lot of help from family and friends and strangers. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
So tell me about your poetry. What is the type of poetry that you're most drawn to? Is it rhyming, free verse? Is it nostalgic? What do
It's
you
yeah,
come
sure.
to?
It's I write free verse poems. They are not what I would call rhyming poems, although I often will include a rhyme somewhere as sort of a tribute to the old masters. When you read poems like, well, let's just take Robert Frost, for example. I mean, you can read these poems and not even realize until you really look at them that there is a rhyme involved there. And so
Mm-hmm.
I do throw in the occasional rhyme. I'm not opposed to rhyming poetry, but most of mine does not. Yeah, I try to make it accessible and intelligent. Not it's not syrupy sweet. I examine real issues like as you say, faith and growing old. Aging is a big theme of mine too. So I like to think they're intelligent and accessible, and yet not off-putting. You don't need a college education and graduate education in poetry to appreciate the poems that I write. Uh,
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Um, so if you were to choose a specific poet or style of poetry that you're most drawn to, is there something that you read as a young person or a particular author that you
Hmm.
read that became an inspiration for you to write?
Yeah, especially in the early days. Uh, gosh, I'm drawing a blank now, but there was here. I can find it real quickly. There was a poet that I actually wrote about, and of course I won't find it now. But anyway, I've always liked the poets that we study in our high school English classes. Usually, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I like Emily Dickinson, I like Robert Frost, I like Walt Whitman, and with more contemporary poets, I mean, I read and admire some people like Billy Collins, and I think that while he's a more formalized, I mean, he's a very informal poet, but he can write villanelles and things that are very difficult to do because he's studied the art form a lot more than I have. But I think in some ways we have some common notes too. So if I had to point to, and a reviewer in fact pointed that out once too. So if I had to point to a contemporary poet, I would probably say Billy Collins.
Awesome. Awesome. I am looking forward to hearing you read. As I've said on this program many times before, I am nothing if not a recovering 6-year-old. So I love it when people read out loud to me, and poetry is especially fun because it is one of those touchstones that we don't get enough of, I think. Um, you
Well,
know,
thanks.
in daily life. So I love having poets on the program. So if anybody's listening out there who is a poet and you want to come on the program, get in touch. I'd love
Yeah,
to have you.
absolutely. Yeah.
So I would love for you to take the microphone
All
and
right.
read to me and set up the pieces as you feel necessary.
Thank you very much. I think as a little bit more general introduction to my poems, this is my first book of poetry, and all the poems were written when I was in my mid to late 60s. Um, I have since turned 70, just in January of this year. Um,
Congratulations.
Thank you. And but one of the things I'm proud of is accomplishing something new late in life. I've always admired people who did that, and this was an opportunity for me to take on my own challenges late in life. And so I hope that there might be some level of inspiration there to other people who are considering um, the same type of challenges. Because
Excellent.
yeah, so that's just sort of by uh, introduction. I'm going to read from. I thought I've written down a few poems from the various themes that you mentioned before, and I would like to maybe read something from each one of those. I'm going to start with the theme of innocence or childhood. And this is a poem called Leaving Victory Park, Cleveland, 1967. We left the pool together after such fun with friends that you risked being late, and my bike's banana seat made easy what was awkward. So you climbed aboard and I pedaled slowly, willing the journey to last. You had no choice. I know that now. We'll never get there in time, you said. And I was embarrassed, but knew you understood by the trusting way you held on to my hips when I stood on the pedals and churned furiously towards your home. We arrived as your family gathered at the table, and you would pay no penalty for my romantic dawdling. I set off for my own home and my own family meal. That was my introduction to the true nature of love. The moment I understood love was more complicated than a pretty girl, a Schwinn stingray, and a bright summer day. And a fun fact on this, or a fun story from this poem, is obviously describes a girl that I had a crush on when I was 12 years old and gave her a ride home from the swimming pool in Cleveland. Uh, I am still in touch with her. I saw her a couple years ago at our elementary school reunion. I've sent her a copy of the book. She's delighted with it, and she remembers that as well. She, of course, is happily married with adult children, and as am I. So, but it's just kind of fun to make those connections from the past.
Oh, absolutely. And for her to be able to have that touchstone of memory through your work, I think is a great thing.
Yep. So that was a fun one of my earlier poems that I got when I got started again. As you mentioned, I do have my wife and I have a passel of grandchildren. I had in my first marriage 3 children, and they've all had children. She had 4 children who have all had children. So between us, we now have 15, I think, is the latest count and probably the final count. So a lot of my poems, when I write about family, reflect on grandchildren. So I'm going to read a couple of those if I can right now.
Excellent.
This first, very short, but fun, I like to think. This is about a grandson when he was about 3 years old. I call this poem The Perfect Age. He likes nothing quite so much as when I propose chicken or zebra each time he holds up a plastic cow. Oh, how he laughs to think his grandfather might really be so silly. Oh, what fun to be ever so much smarter than this funny old man. And I'm going to read another one about some grandchildren here. Yeah, this is yeah, it's called A Poem for You. And it's actually a blend of two of my granddaughters that I see in this poem. When you were 7, I wrote a poem for you. You jumped up and down, thrilled to be my muse. When you were 12, I wrote a poem for you. You hugged me and I sighed, knowing what would come. When you were 17, I wrote a poem for you. You rolled your eyes, thinking I would not see. When your children were born, I wrote a poem for you, though you had no time to read, your very life a poem. When your children left home, you found the first poem I wrote and wept. I sent a soft breeze to remind you I'm still here. Um, I write a lot of love poems too, and most of them, of course, are to my wife, Linda. It's kind of fun to write poems about mature love instead of younger. This is one that I think is fun and funny, and she likes it too. It's called The Nature of Love. Today you asked for a bite of my breakfast sausage, and I gave you all that I had left, at least 2/3, insisting I really didn't want it and had almost decided not to cook sausage at all. Sausage to complete my breakfast of steel-cut oats and fruit. I was happy when you popped that beautifully browned, perfectly spiced breakfast sausage into your mouth with no idea of my sacrifice, for such is the nature of love.
I've
Um,
given up so many strips of bacon in that exact
I,
situation.
yeah, I think anybody that's married
Yeah,
has or has a relationship.
absolutely.
And then there's a poem, there's something about, in my case, my wife and I's second marriages where you're a little more free about the events of your past because we realize we came to this relationship with a past, and
Hmm.
I think this poem addresses that. It's called Sirius, but spelled like the star, Sirius. Serious love. Friends and old lovers lurk along seldom trod pathways until we have trouble recalling faces and voices we were certain would remain clear forever. Best to think of them kindly when we think of them at all, to acknowledge them as memories neither immensely cherished nor profoundly grieved, and to hold close those few warm and constant loves, our night sky, North Star loves, undemanding and undimmed by the passage of time. Um, and that's what is the Beatles song? There are places I remember. I
Yeah.
think I was inspired by that song, which we played at our wedding when I wrote this, and I counted the words in it. And John Lennon is the one who wrote most of that song, and it I referred to it. I had it in the poem once, but in the end it had to come out, but as a master's thesis on love in 123 words. So there's only 123 words. As I recall, that was the number in that poem.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that notion of a master's thesis on love.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful notion.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought so too. So place is important. As you mentioned in the introduction, I write a lot about Lake Michigan and Michigan.
Hmm.
Very important to me. Um, I spent every summer of my life on the shore of Grand Haven, and it was my permanent residence. My parents moved there when I got out of high school, so it was my permanent residence during my college years. My sister now lives in our old home on the lake in Grand Haven. So I have a lot of poems that are set there. And I think I would like to read a few of those if I could.
I would love to hear them.
Great. I'm going to start just one moment here. This is a poem called This Wind. Um, and I wrote this poem after on a March day walking along Lake Michigan in Grand Haven and seeing a very noisy flock of seagulls and wondering what the heck they were doing because there didn't seem to be any fish in the water, etc. So that was the inspiration for this poem called This Wind. With no minnows for feasting in the choppy waves below, the gulls hover and shriek, rehashing the small victories and lost chances of their lives. On a blustering day in March, before the arrival of spring, along Lake Michigan's shore. When the sun's, when the sun sets, they form a loose huddle on the beach, while this wind buries them in sand. But they survive as we all survive, tucking their heads beneath a wing and dreaming of better days.
I love
Mm.
anything that evokes summer on the shoreline.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Lake Michigan's always been a place that I can turn to for inspiration and sustenance, and it's continued to be.
Absolutely.
Now, there was one time in my life before I got sober when this might not surprise you to learn that I sold wine. It was kind of a fun job. I traveled all around the state of Michigan, selling expensive wine, a lot of it French. And I used to know more about wine than I had any reason to know. So this poem I wrote, it was on my travels selling wine up around Traverse City, north up in towards Sutton's Bay, that area. So what's that little peninsula
Oh,
called? The Leelanau area?
Leelanau,
Yeah.
Leelanau. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
And
beautiful
there
up there.
yeah, you'll hear about the sign in the first stanza of this poem that inspired it. It's a real sign.
Okay.
So this poem is called A Village in Michigan. A sign at the edge of town reads, Home of the 1989 Cherry Festival Queen, 25 years after her reign. I'll pass through a dozen villages on my peddler's rounds this day. I wonder if she's still here, her court now consisting of regulars at the American Legion's fish fry, where they profess their pride but share her secret shame. For all her gifts, she never left this place. They would leave, of course they would, if they only had the chance. I cheer myself by deciding she founded a home for children somewhere with a lot of orphans and made love with rock stars before breaking their hearts. Warming to the task, I'm certain she sips champagne with royalty and brings beautiful children here each summer, happy that friends no longer fear her somewhere else beauty. I murmur a
Ooh.
quiet prayer that time has not stood still for her, as it has for her hometown, as it sometimes has for me. Just let her be happy, I pray, driving towards the next village with stories all its own. There's a poem from the road. Uh,
Somewhere else beauty, was that the phrase?
yeah, her
That's
somewhere else beauty, referring
I
to
I love that coupling of vocabulary is so lovely. It's so evocative. I really love that.
great. Yeah. I mean, I think at first I was just trying to express what she might look like and the fact that it would in my
Yeah.
imagination
I've just
it was much more than just an attractive woman. It was
I've never heard that coupling of vocabulary before, but it's poetic just in those few words. I mean, it's really good choice, sir. Well
thank
done.
you.
Well
Thank you.
done.
Yeah.
Do you
And
have more for us?
I'm sorry.
Do you have more?
Yeah, if you want to, can I do a couple
Awesome.
more?
Yeah, do a few more.
Great, I will. I write about other places as well. I'm often inspired by place, so I've written poems about. Oh, I went to Gettys. I'm not going to read the Gettysburg poems because it's a suite of three poems and it's quite long. But I've got poems
Hmm.
about Gettysburg and poems about Wales and poems about my journeys to Arkansas, where one of my children and three of my grandchildren live. But this poem is about Venice and Linda and I went to Venice a couple years ago, and this poem came from that. Beautiful town. Venice. We are reborn several times each day, crossing minor canals and following sidewalks too narrow for sunlight to reach our feet. Suddenly and without warning, we are thrust into brightness. A piazza with cafes where couples hold hands and drink wine, serenaded by sparrows perched on the bare branches of stunted trees. And from our guidebook, we learn a Medici was executed here, his death witnessed by paving stones and statues grown old long before his final day. In this place, where the works of Renaissance masters might be found behind any door, decoration as common as a stained glass window in a simple church back home. There's I started that by saying we are reborn because it felt like it when you get off the main canals and sidewalks of Venice and into the back canals. They're just little tiny things, and it's dark because the buildings go way up on either side, and the sidewalks are no more than 3 or 4 feet wide, or the lanes, I should say. So it did feel kind of like birth when you would come out of one of these little lanes into a big, beautiful
Yeah.
sunlit sunlit plaza. Uh,
Yeah, that's a place I've always longed to visit because it just seems so tremendously romantic. And I'm a child of the water. I come from a sailing family. So the idea of having water as your thoroughfare just really appeals to me.
it was a very beautiful place, and I hope to get back there someday. One
Yeah.
never knows, I suppose. In my writing, I rewrite a lot. In fact, looking over poems before I came on to talk with you tonight, Diana, I found a few that are already published and in set in stone here that I would like to change for the next the next edition, and maybe that will happen. But this is a poem about that, and I think about a little bit more than that too. I call this a poem like a life. A poem like a life is never finished, and then one day it is. The poet makes choices, adds or deletes a word, comma, period, moves or discards entire stanzas, and is forced to admit the poem is not remotely connected to the sad, joyful insight which inspired the first promising line so many months ago. And when the poem at last reads as it should, it is released and cannot be recalled. Only then does the poet see the better path, the way it could have been from the very start. And to me, that was, there's some aspects
That's,
to
you
to
know
our
what?
life in life.
That really captures the life of a writer, not a poet or prose writer. That's really a great deal of how we live our lives
Yeah,
from, you
yeah,
know, uh, I think it was Virginia Woolf who said that writing is nothing more than rewriting.
yeah.
So it's
I've heard that too.
yeah,
Yeah, it's and I think the same is true then in life. I mean, it's a metaphor for our lives. I mean,
absolutely.
aren't
Yeah.
there other paths we'd wished we'd explored or wished we had taken? Perhaps not for all of us, but I think for most of us there are, and certainly there.
I think that's a big part of why I enjoy editing so much.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
sure, that
because
makes sense.
you get to move things around and play with different ideas and you can't necessarily do that in life. So I think editing on some level appeals to me because of that.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I, I would like to read about two more, if I may.
Excellent.
You
Two
have enough time
more.
for that?
Absolutely. We have time for two more.
Great. I write about faith a lot, and it's not in any sense preachy or evangelical, but nonetheless, faith has been important to me throughout my life. And sometimes it's a stronger factor in my life than others. So I'm going to read a couple that are short here on that topic. The first is called Reasons I Go to Church. Because my son's soccer team never painted houses for the poor over spring break in Mexico, or raked leaves for old ladies on the other side of town, but his Sunday school class did. Because folks from church brought soup and casseroles when I came home from the hospital, but I never heard a word from my friends at the bar. Because a granddaughter asked, the day after her sister died, if I thought her sister had already met Jesus, and I was never so certain of anything in my life. I'll render unto Caesar. A man at the gym wears a t-shirt glorifying America's military might and Christ's sacrifice on Calvary. I stand for the flag, his shirt proclaims, but also kneel at the foot of the cross. And I wonder if he understands that Jesus does not celebrate the 4th of July.
Hmm. Okay, that's one of those that makes you think for a minute.
I'm going to finish up with probably the last 7 or 8 poems in my book are on the theme of aging and contemplating the inevitable changes that come
Okay,
with that. So I'll read a poem specifically on that and then the title poem, and we'll be done.
excellent.
This first poem is called Retirement Plans. And it really is based on two people I knew in my life. In my life in Grand Haven, there was a man at the end of our road that everybody called Waving Al because his retirement was to sit in a folding chair outside of his garage and wave at every car that went by. And everybody came to really, we would talk about, I didn't see Al today. I hope he's okay, that sort of thing. And then I had a neighbor who retired, and I had images of him sitting on his screened-in porch at night, listening to the Tigers and looking at the stars and smoking a cigar. So it's kind of a combination of those two people and what I think I might like to do someday in my retirement. So the poem is
Okay.
called Retirement Plans. The old man sits alone as twilight turns dark and dogs call to friends off in the distance, while the radio at his feet murmurs of Detroit Tigers who, in the days of Kaline, Horton, and Cash, would be playing for Toledo. And from a chair just inside his open garage, he waves but rarely speaks to the few who pass by. Neighbors who wave in return but also do not speak. Baseball, crickets, and sprinklers, noise enough in the night.
That's lovely. That reminds me of my grandfather.
Yeah. We always, when we were young, we thought waving Al was kind of silly, but as we got older, we realized what a great
Yeah,
ambassador he was and how much
yeah, yeah.
how much joy he gave people. So
Yeah, yeah. My grandfather had a kind word and a pleasant smile for everybody he encountered.
yeah, that's very nice. So did mine. The title poem, Slow Rivers. I like to watch slow rivers twist and bend downstream, in no hurry to make their way from one place to the next. I admire mountain rivers too, rushing through gorges and over boulders, intent on completing their journey as quickly as they can. My life is mostly slow rivers now, deliberate, little rushing or bounding, and I've learned all rivers set you down at the same spot in the end.
That's lovely.
Yes.
Well done, sir.
Well, thank you.
How nice to be so indulgent. We don't get to listen to poetry as often, I think, as we should. And it's nice to have a few moments of just, it's kind of like sitting around eating chocolate covered peanuts. You kind of do it secretly where nobody can judge you, but you enjoy it so much.
It's a great metaphor. Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
I,
I have, when I first wrote poetry when I was younger, I was always just trying to capture a moment and get something to say,
mm,
somebody to say, "Oh yeah, I remember that. That's happened to me." And as I've gotten older and I think matured in my writing a bit, I still try to do that, but I try to somehow connect it to the rest of us too. So rather than just recognizing a moment, I hope that people know why recognizing that moment is important. Um,
I
it's-
think you're definitely achieving your goal.
well, I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Do you have anything new in the works? Are you writing another collection? Are
Oh,
you
yeah,
working
I
on
am writing
something
new
else?
poems. I just returned, and my wife, our first time ever, we went away for a month. We went to Savannah, Georgia for the month of February and had some nice weather. And I wrote, so I've got sort of a book of a passel of poems I wrote down there, and other new poems. So I'm sure there will be another book. uh,
Okay.
God
You
willing. And the
you
creek don't rise.
mentioned at the top of the show that you used to write prose. Are you considering a novel or a novella in your
No, I'm
future?
not at this time. Sometimes I think about memoir, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and I had a book when I got divorced in the late '90s of essays that was out just on divorce in general. So I could go back to some. I could see myself going to memoir or some essays, but I'm really quite happy with my poems right now. So um, I
Well,
think
I
I'll
think you're leaving a
stick with it.
tremendously lovely legacy for your family.
Well, I appreciate that. That's one of the things I try to do. And the other thing I've done is, of course, I'm grateful to anybody who buys my book, no matter where they get it. But
Mm-hmm.
when I have the chance, I encourage them to buy from a local bookstore. Um,
Absolutely,
go,
100%.
go in there and tell them you want to buy Slow Rivers by Joseph Neely, and they'll order it for you. Um, because those bookstores make such a difference, make our communities interesting and vibrant.
Oh,
So
I agree
that's something I
100%.
always try to get in whenever I have an event like this, is urge people to buy them if they can from their local bookstore.
Yeah, certainly. You and I do many events throughout the year where we get to go to different places and meet readers. And I'm constantly supporting local bookshops. I think that's just an awesome way to not only connect with community, but connecting and supporting the people who love the written word as much as we do.
Yeah.
Those booksellers who are just so passionate about connecting readers and books. I just think we can't do enough for them.
Yeah, I'm trying my best.
Well, I appreciate it, sir. Thank you for
Good.
being on the program tonight. This is really
It,
lovely.
it was a lot of fun. Thank you. I really enjoyed it, and I will look forward to running into you at more shows around the state of Michigan.
Absolutely, me as well. Thank you and have a nice night.
Thank you, Diana.